Hi James, thanks for joining me.
Hi Danny, pleasure.
So nice to see you on the other side of the world, joining us live from Lisbon in Portugal. How's everything over there?
It's good. It's good. It's coming to summer, so I'm in my attic and it's about 30 degrees at 9 in the morning. But we're good. We're good. We've been through a few lockdowns, but we're doing okay.
So nice to talk to you. We've been chatting for what seems like a couple of years, really, about the Surreal Landscape Show and presenting your work, I Go Further Under, which is playing behind me without sound. But yeah, it's so fantastic to finally see your work in the space projected on this 7-metre image. It's quite epic.
Yeah, it's an honor. I think it was 2 years ago or something, wasn't it? We started talking. I don't know. It was before things got really crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I was planning on coming over as well. You know, it was going to coincide with some stuff. We were going to do live, a presentation and but you already told me about the conditions in the gallery. You spoke about a big projection, which is really, I think, it's a privilege to have the work shown like that. And I think, I think of it as a cinematic work in terms of the soundtrack. It's a surround soundtrack and, it's this widescreen image and with a landscape which is quite intense. So to have this in the space, as a scale that's kind of immersive is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's the surround sound is really fantastic as well. When we finally plugged that in and you could hear the 5 speakers, especially the subwoofer, when you get the rumble from the fishing trawler, it really adds an amazing experience in the space.
Yeah, I worked with a guy called John Smethers, he's a musician and a sound artist, but he's also a sound engineer. And he really put a lot of work in to the surround soundtrack, which is super interesting. I mean, I've worked a bit with it before, but sound is often spatial. But when you work with surround sound, the kind of the possibilities are incredible to kind of reproduce or recreate a sense of space. So, you mentioned like when you put it in, when we're emailing each other, you're like, I could hear her whispering, the female actor behind, and then you have the fishing boat, you have these deep rumbles, but we also have a moment where it's sort of the sound is surround, but it starts to also spin. So, kind of the intensity spins around, and you can do these things which, are immersive or evocative, but they can also be kind of disorientating or quite confronting, or really create this sense of this seasickness or this sense of being disorientated in the landscape. So it's great that also, as well as a big image, that you've been able to set up the surround like it should be.
Yeah. Well, we've got a very special evening tonight. We've actually been sourcing some visitors' questions about your work. So visitors have come down to Mornington, have sat in the space, actually watched the film. So it's really interesting to actually have that response and to be able to present about a dozen questions to you, and hopefully there's not too many curly questions in there. The first question is from Victoria from West Footscray. How much contact did you have with Jane Cooper before the film was made?
None, but I'd heard of Jane. Well, I came across the story of the personality of Jane Cooper and what she did probably 8 or 9 years before making the film, in relation to another project where I made a small island as part of a public art project. And I lived on this island just off the coast. I moored in the Dewitt River. And during this project, I was looking at micronations, and I was also looking at, these also people in relation to micronations, but also people like Jane who enact these kind of heroic or romantic or sometimes pathetic acts of independence. And I think Jane's is absolutely heroic. It's nothing pathetic about what she did at all. But I wasn't able to contact her. But I found a friend of mine had made a film about Jane, which was really, it revealed a lot about her personality. And then she told me later that Jane had passed away about 10 years prior, which I didn't realise. I think relatively young. So I never got the chance to meet her, but through this person, Ella Kennedy, who'd made a documentary about Jane, she got to know her quite well and became friends with her. So through speaking with Ella, she gave me some really generous kind of insights into, I guess, Jane's personality without trying to restrict her or, speak on behalf of her. Ella said she was a complicated person. She went to this island because there was a real struggle she was having with herself and also with the world at large around her. She really didn't want to participate in this world as it was at that moment. She wanted to kind of find another world, which I found incredible. But, personality-wise, she said she was also difficult, highly intelligent. And in Ella's film, you get a sense of someone who's very playful, but tough, really tough. And so I felt like I tried to get to know her a little bit through this film and through my research as much as you could without knowing the person direct, but I never got the chance to meet her directly. But just to say, I think in a way, I would have loved to have met her, but it's also interesting that I didn't get the chance because it really becomes this figure or this personality that I had to try to imagine through a speculative space. I had to try to I didn't want to, the actress in the film isn't trying to embody everything that Jane was, but it's just really trying to understand or embody some of the experiences or emotions or feelings that she might have been going through going to this island.
Great. Now I've got a question from Hugo, who is 8 from Cranbourne. Why was the sound both quiet and spooky?
Hi, Hugo. That's a good question. Well, the sound, actually, I have a story about the sound for Hugo. I went to the island before we filmed. So we filmed on Dewitt Island, which is off the south coast of Tasmania. And it is a really difficult place to get to. One of the only ways of getting there is to convince or find a fisherman or someone with a boat who's willing to take you down there. It's also a national park, so you have to be in contact with the park's authorities to make sure that it's possible to go there. I went there by myself. I got dropped there by a fisherman who was actually doing a beautiful project where they go along the south coast and they pick up rubbish. So on the way to do this, they call it the South Coast Cleanup. They dropped me on the island by myself. See you later, James. Good luck. I was going to stay there 2 days, and then another person who's also actually a friend was coming to pick me up. That was the arrangement. I had a satellite phone for emergencies, and that was it. So I got on the island, and it was quiet. You can hear the island faces north, so the swell hits the other side of the island, so you can hear swell wrapping around the island, but you can't hear waves breaking. So the island breathes, it gurgles, and it has, which I wasn't prepared for, a lot of mutton birds. And I was pretty sure I could hear the sound of the ocean coming from underneath and through the island, through the mutton bird holes, and it was absolutely freaky. And then at sunset, I'm sitting on this island by myself, which feels like, and I think he is absolutely at the end of the world, not knowing if this person in 2 days is going to pick me up or not. And I start to hear this screaming, which sounds, sorry about the description, but it's true, like a baby being strangled. And I'm like, is there a monster or some sort of animal on this island that I'm not aware of? And then I hear these sounds that sound like a big padded kind of animal running along the ground, like boom, 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 all around me. And I'm like, I'm trying not to panic, but I'm really scared. And I'm listening to these sounds. Like I have no reference to what this sound could be. And I look up, and the sky's getting dark. It's dusk, and I just see thousands of black shapes coming in at me, kind of like bats. And what they were doing, they were flying in fast, and they couldn't stop, and they're hitting the ground hard, going boom, and then rolling. So it sounded like something running. And then when they're on the ground, their chicks were screaming for them to locate each other. So what was happening, the mutton birds were coming in at the end of the night, as they do every day. It was mutton bird season. And I didn't realize, but they're really great flyers. Anyone who's been in these environments knows they're good at flying long distances. They're not so good at landing or taking off. So they hit the ground really hard, and they find their chicks through making noise. But the noise is like from a horror film. So this stuck with me in a very kind of profound way. It was funny, but it was also terrifying. So when we developed the soundtrack, there was a lot of references from the island. We went back and filmed. We did a lot of field recordings to think about. So this stuff of the island breathing like a body, you know, like being in this landscape and thinking, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And maybe this landscape is almost like has a consciousness and there's a body. Having these things unexpected, like these birds screaming, falling out of the sky. And then spending time on a fishing boat. And you know, if you spend a lot of time traveling on a fishing boat, the sound of the engines kind of gets in your head. It's almost like this kind of hardcore techno track that just kind of like keeps on revolving around in your head. So all these things were resonating as oral experiences going there. And this is the stuff I wanted to try to think about and capture in the making of the film.
Mm, cool. Now I've got another question from Willem, who's 5 years old, also from Cranbourne, who wants to know, why wasn't there any blood when you chopped the giant fish's head off?
Hi, Willem. I remember there being a lot of blood. Maybe you want, maybe you want to see some more blood. But yeah, we caught, this was on the way back from filming on the island. So everyone was a bit exhausted, but feeling very excited. And the fisherman said there was a point on the trip back that this is a good place. If we want to try to catch tuna, we'll put down a long line. So his deckhand pulled in a tuna, that one that you saw the actor cutting up. By the way, the actor was for years a fisherman, so he's very experienced on boats and he knows how to chop up a tuna. I don't think he was chopping off its head, but you know, tuna's a very, very special fish and it's very expensive. So to catch one fresh, you know, it's a beautiful animal. So to catch one fresh is a really special experience. And so what the fisherman was doing was making sure he got every tiny little bit of meat off the fish. So nothing went to waste. So there was blood, but also with tuna, it's got such a rich, dense red meat. You have to bleed it first. It's quite graphic, this, but it's all part of the experience of, you know, what we did. So they let the fish bleed out and then the meat stays fresher. By the way, I caught one too, and it came to the surface and it was going to be my first tuna, and then the line broke and it got away.
Amazing, pretty amazing. I've got a question from 10-year-old Ava from Cranbourne. Did the film make you dizzy or seasick when it went upside down and sideways?
Well, I wanted the film to make you dizzy and seasick. That was what it was trying to do. Hopefully you felt a little bit of that, Ava. What happened also, I mean, these are all stories, but I guess because we were filming in a very particular environment, you know, I could talk for a week about all the things that happened. And this is also what's exciting, but also super challenging about making a work when you have to go to a difficult environment, because you also have to take a group of people with you. So it was a very small crew, but there was me, there was a sound recordist, there was a camera person, there was a production assistant, there was the captain of the boat, there was his deckhand, there was the actor, the older fisherman, and there's the younger actress, Emily Millage. So there was a group of us, and we had to take cameras and sound recording equipment and all this stuff. On the way there, we worked with this very generous fisherman, Greg Hughes, who took us there, and we spent a night down the south coast of Tasmania, near Recherche Bay. It was quite quiet and calm. Everyone was happy. And then when we leave that point, we started to head around a place called Southeast Cape, where it really opens up to the Southern Ocean. And from there, it's about another 6 hours to get to Dewitt Island. And it wasn't a huge swell that day, but there was a decent swell. And we realized the difference about traveling on a fishing boat, which is, you know, in protected waters when you get into the open ocean. And fishing boats are very strong, but they don't have a deep hull, so they move around a lot. And our camera person, Joe Shemich, who is a fantastic, very fit guy who works a lot in the wilderness, because of some things he was going through at the time, he got seasick, but he got really, really, really seriously seasick. So seasick that we almost had to turn back. He got put on some electrolytes and oxygen, and it was quite intense. It was another thing where you can't, predict this kind of experience. And so it was really important. I wanted these images. I wanted to film us going to this island because there was the anticipation. There was all this stuff with the ocean that I wanted to film. And he was so sick, he couldn't pick up his camera. And his camera was a very expensive professional camera. And understandably, he was like, "You're not going to use my camera." So I got a GoPro camera that I had because I knew I wanted to film with a GoPro, and I taped it to a long pole and I hung over the edge of the fishing boat, and I tried to think about the experience that Joe was feeling so seasick, and we all started to feel a bit seasick. And what I tried to do was to film in a way where you lost orientation. So you didn't know where the horizon was anymore. And I also just tried to do simple things where I flipped the camera around on this pole and I tried to film the very surface of the ocean without the camera touching the water. So you could feel the tension of the water pulling off the fishing boat, and you get these images of the cliffs. But this was all filmed on a little, $300 GoPro camera, but it allowed me to try to think, okay, this is a really difficult place to get to, and the experience of getting there is a real challenge. How might I film this in a way where 2 years later or 4 years later, when you're in Mornington Peninsula watching this film, you get a little bit of a sense of this intensity of the experience of being on the fishing boat.
And I think that's the thing, projected at 7 meters, you really do get that seasick feeling when you watch the film. Yeah. Now, the next question's from Mustafa from Abbotsford. Are the fishermen in the film the actual fishermen of the region in Tasmania, or are they actors?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mustafa, because they could have been actors, I guess. But there was something when I was, it's a film with really only 2 actors, the younger woman who's playing Jane and this older man. Because Jane's experience was that she went to this island, she wanted to be left alone. She didn't want contact with other humans. That was her clear decision. But she constantly struggled against people interfering. So that was the media. She had a lot of people visit her trying to tell stories about her. But she also had sometimes invited, sometimes not invited visits from fishermen. So I wanted the other actor to be this fisherman character that was always kind of in the background, that had a sort of menacing presence, wasn't necessarily threatening, but there was something about him that was disrupting her experience. And I wanted this thing of, if you spend time on any fishing boat, but especially I think in this environment, off the south coast of Tasmania, that etches that experience into your being, into your face, into how you move and look and are. And I think it would be really difficult to find an actor who would be comfortable on a fishing boat, who would know how to move, who would just know how to be, and also would have this face that would be weathered in a way that tells that story of that environment. So I was talking to Brendan Walls, who was a sound recordist in the film, but also was a producer, who really helped. The film wouldn't have happened without him. And early on, we were like, who could the fisherman character be? And we were just going through, just finding images of people as references or talking about possible people who might be able to help. And it was Brendan who came to me one day. He's like, "James, I got it. Like, you got to see this guy." And this guy is this amazing personality called Chaz Blundell, who for years was a fisherman off the south coast of Tasmania. He fished around that region. But he has a life like some sort of Hollywood star that you wouldn't believe. And it's so unbelievable that he's written 3 books about his life, which are called The Adventures of Chaz from Taz, which kind of sounds like a humorous title, but he's got the most incredible stories about traveling around the world as a young Tasmanian man, working partly as a deckhand. So he worked with international yacht races, but then he also would, for wealthy people who had boats, he would skipper their boats. And he would just travel around the world having these most incredible adventures. And so he's quite a personality. He's very comfortable. He's quite comfortable in front of a camera because there's a confidence there. He's got this experience which is just etched into his face. And when I contacted him, he was super excited about being in the film. So he's an actor, but he's very much a fisherman, and he knows the ocean maybe better than anyone in Australia, I'll say. Let's see, that'll probably be controversial. But so, yeah, that was Chaz, and that was how we came to know him.
Pretty unique character to find and to bring into the film.
There's only one Chaz in the world, for sure. He was incredible. He was very generous. I mean, he's done so much, and he hasn't done film though. And so I said he was comfortable in front of the camera, but this thing of speaking lines or just feeling like, he was suddenly performing. It took him time to relax into that, but he was very open to the experience, and he was really generous.
Mm. Now, the next question is from Julie from Ferntree Gully. Julie asks, is the film a metaphor for something?
Hi, Julie. Maybe, I don't know. I don't necessarily think so much in metaphors, and I don't think that I was trying to respond or think through a metaphor in the making of the film. I think some things revealed themselves to me. So, as I said, one of the things about Jane's experience, which is interesting, is that she went to this place to be isolated and she didn't want contact. And then suddenly she started receiving these letters from men, mainly all around the world, predominantly middle-aged men, predominantly articulating their fantasies about living alone at the end of the world and the island with her in a kind of very problematic way. They referred to Jane and Tarzan. It was almost someone, I think, talked about Adam and Eve. They were very kind of like fundamental fantasies that somehow Jane was helping them enact. Some of them were already living isolated lives. And they were never, I don't think, the letters I read anyway, abusive, but they were too personal. They were assuming too much. They were presumptuous, and they were somehow invasive. And so I also was thinking, well, what are you doing? I'm making this film about this person, and I'm interested in her as a character, because I think it was incredible what she did at the time as a young woman in the 70s to, enact her own autonomy. But she basically wanted to escape, and especially with the media, she wanted to escape representation. She didn't want her story told, and she didn't want photos of herself to be taken in a really simple way. So then, 40 years later, I come along and I'm still trying to capture, in a way, I don't want to restrict her, but I'm still trying to make images about her experiences. So I'm like, am I continuing this legacy of these men harassing her through writing these letters about what they think her experience is? So if anything, I don't know, that's so much a metaphor, but I thought about this problematic of the letter writing as an attempt to access or make contact with her. And then I guess in terms of metaphors, I thought about the film as a sort of letter. And I tried to be aware of that, and I tried to be aware of that in a critical way, not to then stop it or run away from it or abandon it, but just to be like, I'm continuing this problematic attempt at representation. So what does that mean?
Donna from Edithvale asks, how did you decide to choose this topic?
Hi Donna, I think I mentioned it earlier. So it was this thing that came, as part of research for another project when I was looking at people enacting, trying to create spaces for autonomy or enact or performing acts of withdrawal. And so I was looking at this thing of micronations, people creating space that they say, this is autonomous space, and I'm going to control the laws, the currency, the way people can access or not access this space. And during this research, I was also looking at as well as kind of trying to create autonomous space, people who withdraw as a way, of enacting their own autonomy. So that was when I came across Jane's story. And, there's plenty of, stories which are somehow similar. And this was for a project where I kind of, in a way, perform my own act of withdrawal, which was also problematic for other reasons I won't go into now. But I think what fascinated me about Jane was that I had grown up in Tasmania. I knew that area quite well because I am a surfer, so I travel a lot around the south coast of Tasmania. So I'm familiar with the landscape, and I know this kind of the difficulty of accessing and navigating and even just existing in an environment like that. And so I felt, I'm not going to claim that, I had this connection with Jane, but I felt this kind of curiosity that was somehow close to my own personal experience that I wanted to look at further.
Now I've got another question from 5-year-old Willem now, which is, I think, one of the best questions we've had this evening. How did you sleep on the boat?
Good question, Willem. It is a good question because I was like, so, how many of us? There was the captain of the boat, his deckhand, me, Brendan as production and sound, Emily, the actress, Chaz, the actor, Tess Campbell, who was production assistant, and Joe Shemish, who was the DOP. So there was 8 of us. And the fishing boat had space for all of us, but it was quite cramped. We slept up at the bow, and there's just a series of bunk beds kind of stacked on top of each other. There was another little room that I think Tess and Emily shared, just as to give them their space, so they're not having to sleep around, smelly, snoring men like us, and we all fit in the boat relatively comfortably. It wasn't a huge boat, but there was enough space. The thing was, we were filming on the island, so we had to also take tents and stuff to the island just in case the weather changed. The boat was quite close to the island, but if the weather changed or if there was a problem, then we had to know that we could also stay on the island for a couple of days while they got help or whatever. But I spoke with the national parks, and I got permission to film there. And we could have slept there, but we couldn't make any fire. We really had to be very careful when we're there. So I preferred not to sleep on the island because I didn't want to, with all of us, have to kind of, run the risk of damaging the environment at all. So yeah, we all crammed into the fishing boat. It was okay, but even on the island, it wasn't direct swell, but as I said, the swell came around the island because we were on the northern side, so the southern side there's still a reasonable amount of swell, so it would wrap around the island, and the fishing boat would just do this kind of rolling all night. So even though Joe and the rest of us got over our seasickness, there was still always this sense of like, you'd have strange night's sleep, very different to sleeping in your bed at home. If you'd ever slept a night on a boat in the Southern Ocean, it really kind of, where you are in the world.
Now, Marianne from Melbourne would like to know, where are all the original letters kept?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, they're amazing documents in a way. I think it's quite a personal collection for Jane and her family. And so as far as I know, Jane married an Australian man, and she spent years in regional New South Wales, as far as I know. And so, she has family in Australia. She has this, I'm getting mixed up. He was from the States, he came to Australia. So she married an American man, but she lived for years in regional New South Wales. She also has family, of course. So I think the family, have a lot of her documents, but she also she became very good friends with Ella Kennedy, who made this documentary about her. And there's some personal items that Ella also has a responsibility of looking after, but they're not public items. They keep them very much safe. And I think they're, Jane's somehow a public figure, but she didn't want to be. So these items are very much for personal collection.
The next question is from Alpa, from Tarneet. She asks, overall, what was Jane's survival experience like for the whole 12 months she was on Dewitt Island?
Hi, Alpa. It was, I know from her talking about her experience in the documentary, as I said, that Ellen made, And I know from, doing research, with some of the media articles about her at the time, I mean, it's funny. There was also there's a big gap between what the media said she was doing and her experience. So the media talked about her, being half naked, walking around the rocks, getting crayfish, and there was also rumours about her growing marijuana on the island. So she actually got taken to court. She had quite a direct struggle with the Tasmanian government at the time, which I imagine, I think, was very conservative, and they made her life very difficult. It's quite sad, actually. They really, she had, as far as I know, a criminal record because they took her to court on drugs charges. And she just laughed. She's like, I couldn't grow, a potato or a carrot in this environment. It's not even, it's this kind of peaty earth. It's very soft. It's super wet. It's not the environment where you just plug a few vegetables, let alone some marijuana plants in, and, they take off. So it's insane they took her to court on these charges. And it's also insane. The media said that she was feasting on crayfish and abalone. I mean, of course, there's a lot of crayfish and abalone in the environment, but you need to dive for it. She didn't have the conditions to dive. So she basically was surviving on, dried food, lentils, rice, just big tins of or drums of food that wouldn't go off in the damp conditions. But to be honest, from what I understand, she was very clear of why she wanted to be there, but it's kind of miserable. It wasn't a pleasurable experience in terms of, she was living in really tough conditions, eating really, really basic food. The fishermen, I think there was various fishermen who would visit her, some more considered friends than others, but there were some ones that she became friends with and who kind of took on a certain role of just keeping an eye out for her. So they'd check in every now and again just to make sure she was healthy and okay. And as far as I know, they'd bring her, food that was outside the normal staple diet of lentils and rice. So they'd bring her sometimes, some roast beef or some fish or something like that. Just to finish, I mean, I think one of the things that really touched me and I think revealed her incredible intelligence and resistance is when she talked about the experience. She wanted to go there to learn how to live again because of personal things that had happened to her. She felt like she needed to be shaken back or confronted by life. And so this environment would confront her. And then she talked about the experience of being there was quite different, where things started to lose meaning. Not to say that life lost meaning, but she talked about time losing meaning. Her only reference to time was what the light was doing, and that changes, of course, during the year. But she also talked about this thing of her day being taken up with sort of fairly mundane activities, going for walks, cleaning up, keeping the campsite organised, stuff that just is of little importance sometimes, but when you're living that experience, takes up a lot of time and becomes your whole world. And I think it was in one of the interviews, she talked about not so much experiencing, great joys or great sorrows, but just having this kind of experience of just a kind of also almost a bare existence, just a kind of a fundamental just being, which maybe is somehow almost a kind of like a beautiful way of dealing with life. But I think, yeah, she wasn't, eating amazing food or having these great kind of events that were happening during the day that would mark out this kind of heightened sense of experience. It was really just like connecting with the environment, feeling time through changing light, eating basic food, and just...
Yeah, pretty amazing. The final visitor question we have is from Baxter from Sorrento, who asks, how old is the girl and the actor? So I guess Jane Cooper was 17, wasn't she, when she went down to the island? How old is the actress in the film?
Yeah. The female actor is a woman from Melbourne who's a fantastic actor. I came across her. She was recommended to me. She's done a bunch of theatre work, not so much film work. Her name's Emily Millage. And at the time, I think she was about 22. But so she was a bit older than Jane, but she also has this, which really drew me to her, as well as being incredibly talented. She has this way shifting her expression, and that her age, or even a sense of innocence or not, could change dramatically, in the moment, from the way she would just kind of change her expression, the way her face would be. She has this very prominent kind of forehead as well, and she has this. I find her age kind of ambiguous, and also whether there's an innocence there or whether there was much more control or autonomy. She has this way of flipping between these kind of, maybe slightly vulnerable younger person and this very autonomous, quite powerful, woman. And she can just do that very quickly and skillfully. So, yeah, she was 22 at the time, but I felt like she embodied that kind of personality, that sort of difficult, complex personality that I think Jane was, really incredibly. And then Chaz didn't really talk about his age. I think, probably late 60s, but 200 years worth of experience in the body. He's lived probably, 5 people's lives in those years he's been on Earth.
Yeah, well, that wraps it up for our visitor questions. And thanks to all our visitors for submitting those questions. It's been so great to be able to ask James directly. I've just got a question, I guess, to finish up with. I'd love to hear your reflections on the film. I guess you made the work a number of years ago, and it's been shown on a few occasions since. But I guess just for you personally, thinking about the project from the perspective of today, what are your thoughts about this work now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I think most artists or filmmakers would make work, you make a choice, you make work from the current situation, from the conditions or the experiences that you live personally, or, that are happening in the world around you. I think that's in a way obvious. I think what then, you make a choice depending on the type of work you make or how you think of how you want to respond. Do you want to make a work in direct response to something like what we're experiencing now with COVID or lockdowns? Or do you kind of absorb those experiences and they come out maybe more indirectly? And I think I was quite clear though that even though I wouldn't make the work the same again if I made it now, and I think, every work you learn through and you probably do differently, and sometimes there's hindsight and even regret. I kind of know, for me, I can see the work in terms of a trajectory and how I came to that curiosity. Even the fact that Jane's story and wanting to make this work kind of emerged out of a previous work that was very different work, 8 years earlier. I knew that line that led me to making this film. And then I was kind of thinking, these things about withdrawal or resistance, or finding places of autonomy, or thinking about independence, thinking about ways of representing the landscape, even this thing of her going to an island and trying to live a life, starting again. He has these kind of colonial fantasies as well, which is something, obviously really problematic. For better or worse, I think for me they were all present, and I wanted them to be embedded in the film. But I don't tend to make work where I think, this is the issue, and I'm going to, speak directly to it in a way that kind of captures it, or tries to argue or respond to an issue or a situation in a didactic way, or in a way that encapsulates it and kind of, maybe for me strangles it. I want to kind of spin around it. I want to kind of sit underneath it. I want to make this work where I'm very much committed. It was a really difficult work just pragmatically to make, to get to this place, and to find the money, to find the right people to, who would be involved, all these things. But in the end, I wanted the work to kind of, sit there like a lucid dream. The letters are real, the experience is real, the place is real, but I want the film to kind of, come into you, till you feel the landscape, you kind of, somehow absorb it, and then it kind of leaves you, and it's like, like what just happened? So yeah, I don't know if that's also, like, I don't think I've answered your question super directly, but I wanted to feel and be very committed to, and I wanted to understand the reasons that led me to this story. And I wanted to be committed to the making of the work. But in the end, as an experience, I didn't want to try to encapsulate that experience in a way that would suffocate it. I wanted to spin around it, absorb it, but still to give it space to, you know, as Jane's experience, to exist autonomously, and for me to have this experience that, you know, kind of remains, but like a lucid dream remains. Like I feel like, you know, it was a few years ago, and it just feels like, did that really happen or or not? But, you know, in a funny way, those questions or things that I was dealing with in making the work is still very present for me today. I'm making a new work now, which in a completely different way, visually or aesthetically, is still struggling with things that I was, you know, questions that I was dealing with in the making of this work.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for taking part in this Q&A session via Zoom. It's been really great to reach out to you and speak to you in person for this program.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's great to kind of be there remotely as well, and nice to be able to have the chance to talk through the work. You know, as I said, like, you know, in a way, the film is it's a little abstract, so it's nice, you know, if there's questions that are just kind of anecdotal or pragmatic questions, it's also like, it's fun to talk about the experience of making the work and to go directly to some of those questions that people might have. So thanks for the opportunity to.
Yeah, well, thanks again to all of our visitors who submitted questions, and a huge thank you to James. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
Thanks, mate.